Approximately 200 words. Dawn breaks over a dusty Mississippi crossroads. A black man in a tailored suit steps out of a horse-drawn carriage, ledger in one hand, land deeds in the other. The year is 1889, decades before Wall Street becomes a symbol of American finance. This man is already beating it at its own game. No textbooks mention him, no museum carries his portrait. But on this morning, farmers, bankers, and politicians all know exactly who he is. They fear him. He moves with calm precision, reviewing contracts worth more than entire counties. His empire stretches across railroads, banks, timber fields, and cotton gins. And the secret no one wanted you to know? He built it all in a world designed to keep him illiterate, landless, and invisible. This is the story they buried. The story of a black millionaire, wealthy enough to buy out the very men who once claimed to own people like him. A man who understood markets before America even allowed him to vote. A man whose financial genius threatened the economic order of the post-Civil War South, and paid the price for it. Because when a black man starts winning in a game built to keep him losing, the system doesn't applaud. It erases. If you open an American textbook, the rise of wealth after the Civil War sounds simple. They tell you the South was broken. They say white landowners rebuilt it through ingenuity, hard work, and market expansion. They talk about railroads, cotton prices, new banks, new industries, each one credited to white businessmen who supposedly dragged the region into the modern economy. And when it comes to black Americans, the narrative gets even cleaner. Textbooks say formerly enslaved people struggled, worked as sharecroppers, lived in poverty, waited for opportunities that almost never arrived. They talk about hardship, yes, but they never talk about triumph. They never talk about brilliance. They never talk about a black man playing the financial game so well that white bankers studied his moves in silence while pretending he didn't exist. In the official version, no black entrepreneur ever outplayed the market. No black investor ever built a multi-industry empire. No black millionaire shaped the economic future of entire towns. According to the story we're taught, such a man couldn't exist, shouldn't exist, wouldn't be allowed to exist. But he did, and they spent more than a century trying to bury him. His name was Isaiah Montgomery. Born into slavery on the plantations of Joseph Davis, brother of Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederacy, Isaiah wasn't supposed to learn anything but obedience. But Davis had a strange belief. Enslaved people should be educated only enough to make the plantation profitable. Isaiah took that crack in the system and turned it into a doorway. By the time he was a teenager, he'd mastered bookkeeping. He could calculate profits faster than the overseers. He studied land values, crop cycles, and market behavior with an obsession no one around him understood. And after emancipation, while millions were fighting just to survive, Isaiah made a decision that terrifies white historians to this day. He didn't want equality. He wanted power, and he knew exactly where power came from. Land. He pooled money with his cousin Benjamin Green, negotiated deals with white landowners who underestimated him, and quietly acquired tens of thousands of acres along the Mississippi River. Then he did something even bolder. He built a black-owned city from the ground up. Mound Bayou, a city with black banks, black schools, black businesses, black farmers. A city where black wealth circulated without white permission. And here's the part that shatters the official story. Isaiah's financial operation ran more efficiently than the white towns surrounding him. His credit system was more stable. His land management strategy was more profitable. His agricultural planning outperformed entire counties. White bankers came to study his model, quietly. White politicians negotiated with him, privately. Because a black man had figured out a formula they couldn't match. He didn't just outsmart Wall Street. He built something Wall Street couldn't control. 1890s, Mound Bayou wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. Trains stopping through the Delta made sure to load black-grown cotton from black-owned warehouses. Merchants in nearby white towns complained that black customers were leaving their communities to spend money in a city they didn't control. Isaiah Montgomery had built an economic engine, one powered by strategy, discipline, and ruthless efficiency. He understood something Wall Street would later champion as gospel: vertical integration. Own the land, own the crops, own the processing mill, own the distribution point. Then reinvest the profit back into your own people. For black communities still haunted by slavery, this wasn't business. It was liberation. At its peak, Mound Bayou had its own factories, its own bank, its own newspaper, even its own hospital, operated entirely by black professionals in a state where white hospitals refused to treat black bodies. And Isaiah? He became the man white Mississippi quietly feared. He could influence cotton prices. He could negotiate freight rates. He could pull entire counties' economies in directions no white politician expected. In a world determined to keep him powerless, Isaiah did the unthinkable. He made himself indispensable. But the higher he climbed, the more dangerous it became. Because when a black man gains economic influence, the system looks for ways to take it back. Didn't burn Mound Bayou the way mobs burned Tulsa. They didn't bomb it from airplanes or march with torches. Mississippi had a different strategy: quieter, cleaner, harder to trace. They used policy. They used redistricting. They used banks that suddenly lost loan paperwork for black farmers. They used railroad companies that raised shipping rates only for Isaiah's region. They used state officials who rewrote tax codes to squeeze black landowners until the margins snapped. Every lever of the system moved against him at once, not violently, but surgically. And then came the narrative shift, the most effective weapon of all. White newspapers began calling Mound Bayou unsustainable. Textbooks framed it as a failed experiment. Historians erased the financial brilliance behind it and replaced Isaiah's legacy with a single phrase: a controversial figure. Controversial because he succeeded where he wasn't supposed to. Controversial because he built a black-run economic powerhouse in the Deep South. Controversial because acknowledging his success would mean acknowledging the lie at the foundation of American economics: that black intelligence, black strategy, and black financial leadership were somehow impossible. So they erased him the quiet way, by omission, by silence, by pretending the empire he built never mattered. But buried stories don't stay buried forever. Today, approximately 300 words. Walk through any U.S. classroom today and you'll hear the same story repeated. Black poverty is a tragedy. Black wealth is an anomaly. Black financial success is rare, exceptional, almost accidental. But Isaiah Montgomery's life destroys that narrative. Because what he built wasn't a miracle. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a one-in-a-million moment. It was the natural result of what happens when black people finally get space to control their own labor, their own land, their own economic destiny. And that's why his story vanished. Because if Americans knew that black wealth once flowed freely across Mississippi, if they knew a formerly enslaved man used strategy sharper than the bankers who underestimated him, if they knew black communities built stable economies long before Wall Street learned to walk, then the entire excuse for today's racial wealth gap collapses. People couldn't say, just work harder, when the evidence shows black Americans did work harder and were targeted precisely because they succeeded. They couldn't claim black communities lack financial discipline when Isaiah's town outperformed white counties with fewer resources and no institutional support. They couldn't cling to the myth that black leadership can't run a thriving economy, because Mound Bayou proved the opposite for nearly a century. Isaiah Montgomery matters now because he exposes a truth America still avoids. The problem was never black capability, it was black potential. The economic power that terrified the system then still terrifies the system now. And buried histories like his don't just rewrite the past, they clarify the present. They remind us that every claim about inevitable inequality is a story built on erasure, not fact. Isaiah showed what happens when black genius is allowed to breathe. And that's exactly why they tried to suffocate it. Out approximately 250 words. Isaiah Montgomery didn't leave behind marble statues or oil portraits. He left something louder, a blueprint, a reminder that black wealth isn't a modern fantasy. It's an inheritance the system has spent generations trying to bury. Stand in what used to be Mound Bayou, and you can still feel it. The echo of a town built on discipline, vision, ownership. A town that proved black prosperity wasn't just possible, it was inevitable when the playing field wasn't rigged. That's why his name disappeared. Not because he failed, but because he succeeded too well. But once you know the truth, it's impossible to unsee what was done. A man born into bondage outplayed the economic architecture of the Deep South. He carved out a financial safe haven for his people. He built a community that forced America to confront the lie it depended on, that black excellence is rare, that black leadership is unstable, that black wealth is unnatural. Isaiah shattered all of it, and they buried the pieces. But you're holding one now, and the question becomes, how many more are still hidden? How many more stories were wiped clean because they proved too much, too early, too powerfully? If you believe this truth deserves more light than the lies ever did, share it. Because the more people know, the harder it becomes to erase us again.